My name is Margaret Hughes. I am 32 years old, and on the day I was supposed to get married, I arrived at my venue to find the iron gates locked. 2 hours before the ceremony, I stood in my wedding dress on a gravel driveway in Wauwau, Wisconsin, staring at an empty estate. My mother-in-law had canceled my wedding 3 days earlier without telling me. She stole my $15,000 deposit and rerouted my wedding to a country club I had rejected. She expected me to panic. She expected me to surrender. Instead, I used my background in supply chain logistics to move an entire event in 90 minutes. What I did next cost her family everything. Welcome back to Cherry Vengeance. If you have ever had an in-law try to hijack your life, tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments below. Be sure to hit subscribe. Now let me take you to 100 on a freezing Saturday in November. The wind off the lake was biting. It caught the hem of my dress as I stepped out of my car. The historic stone estate was supposed to be bustling with florists and coordinators. Instead, it was silent. A heavy chain wrapped around the front gates. A brass padlock held it shut. Behind me, a white delivery box truck idled on the gravel. Greg, my caterer, stepped out of the cab. He walked toward me holding a clipboard. He did not look confused. He looked grim. He turned the clipboard around so I could read the top sheet. It was my contract. Across the center of the page, someone had stamped the word voided in red ink. Greg said he received an automated cancellation notice on Thursday. He assumed it was a system glitch. It was not. I pulled out my phone and dialed Ethan. Ethan Caldwell was the man I was supposed to marry at 300. The phone rang 3 times and went straight to voicemail. I stared at the screen. To understand what was happening, you have to understand the Caldwells. They operate on appearances and control. Ethan is the golden son. His mother, Patricia, is the architect of their lives. From the moment Ethan proposed, Patricia viewed my wedding not as a celebration, but as a hostile takeover. I refused her money. I booked my own venue, I paid my own vendors. I did this because I knew that if Patricia held the purse strings, she would hold the power. I thought paying my own way made me safe. I dialed Ethan a second time, voicemail again. The temperature was dropping. My hands were turning numb. 200 guests were scheduled to arrive in less than an hour. Greg stood next to me on the gravel. He folded his arms against the cold and asked if we should call the police. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was not Ethan, it was a text message from Patricia. I opened it. It was 2 sentences long. The estate had plumbing issues. We relocated everything to the Oakmont Country Club. See you there. I read the text twice. Oakmont Country Club was Patricia's territory. It was the venue she demanded we use 6 months ago. It was the venue I explicitly rejected. The estate did not have plumbing issues. The chain on the gate was not an accident. Patricia had canceled my wedding, shut me out of my own venue, and forced the entire day onto her turf. She believed that with the clock ticking and the guests arriving, I would have no choice but to show up at Oakmont and play by her rules. I locked my phone screen. I looked at the padlocked gate. I was not going to Oakmont. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. The message was only 2 sentences long, but it contained a year's worth of psychological warfare. Oakmont Country Club was not a random backup location. Oakmont was Patricia's domain. It was the venue she had demanded we use from the very first day of our engagement. She had handed me a glossy Oakmont brochure before she even said congratulations. I had said no. I wanted neutral ground. Oakmont meant Patricia chose the menu. Oakmont meant Patricia controlled the seating chart. Oakmont meant Patricia owned the optics. Relocating my wedding there behind my back was not an administrative adjustment. It was a hostile takeover. My phone buzzed a second time. It was not Ethan. It was a text from Simone. Simone is married to Ethan's older brother, Jard. She works as a corporate auditor for a firm in Chicago. She is brilliant, observant, and African-American, which means she has spent the last 4 years navigating the polite, coded hostility of Patricia Caldwell's country club circle. Simone survives the Caldwell family by treating them like a corrupt corporate entity. She does not argue with them. She watches the ledger, she documents their missteps, she operates in the background. Her message was brief: I am standing in the Oakmont foyer. Patricia planned this for weeks. She has custom napkins. Do not come here. I read the words custom napkins. Custom linens take at least 3 weeks to order, print, and deliver. The plumbing issue at the historic estate was a total fabrication. Patricia had orchestrated this installation nearly a month ago, and Ethan knew. Ethan was currently standing inside Oakmont Country Club. He had let me drive to a locked gate in Waka, knowing I would find a voided contract and a padlock. The old Margaret, the woman who had spent 2 years trying to earn a seat at Patricia's dinner table, would have gotten into her car. She would have driven to the country club. She would have forced a smile, walked down an aisle paid for by her abuser, and married a man who allowed her to freeze on a gravel driveway. Patricia was counting on social pressure. She believed that with the clock ticking and 200 guests arriving, I would choose public humiliation over causing a scene. I locked my phone screen. I looked at the padlocked gate. I chose the scene. I turned to Greg. He was still standing next to the idling delivery truck, holding his clipboard, waiting for my cue. Greg owned a boutique catering company. He had built his business from a single food truck and despised the old money arrogance of places like Oakmont. He had dealt with Patricia during our tasting sessions. She had snapped her fingers at his serving staff to get their attention. He remembered. Greg, I said, are you contractually obligated to serve this food at Oakmont Country Club? He looked at the voided contract on his clipboard. He looked at me. My contract is with you, Margaret, not your mother-in-law. I serve the food where you tell me to serve the food. I need a venue. I said, I need an empty room anywhere in Milwaukee. We have 90 minutes. Greg did not hesitate. The wedding industry in Wisconsin is a tight network. Vendors talk, they share blacklists, they favor each other. Greg pulled out his phone and walked a few paces away, speaking in low, rapid sentences. He mentioned a favor owed. He mentioned a stranded bride. He hung up and walked back to me. Downtown Milwaukee, Greg said, the 3rd Ward District. There is a craft brewery with a private industrial warehouse attached to it. Exposed brick concrete floors, loading docks. The owners just finished a morning event and the cleanup crew is done. The space is empty. It is ours if we want it. It is a 25-minute drive from here. Exposed brick and concrete. It was the exact opposite of Oakmont. No chandeliers, no dress codes, no velvet ropes, no Patricia. We will take it, I said. The bride disappeared. The supply chain logistics manager took over. My daily job involves coordinating freight across 4 time zones, routing shipments around hurricanes, and minimizing downtime. Moving a wedding was just a localized supply chain problem. We had inventory. We had transportation. We needed a distribution channel. How much food is in the truck? I asked. Everything, Greg said. Short ribs, roasted asparagus, 300 bottles of wine. We just need tables. The brewery has long wooden tasting tables, I said. It works. Go, Greg signaled his prep team in the cab of the truck. They started strapping down the warming ovens. I stood in the cold wind, visualizing the timeline. The florist was supposed to arrive at 1:30. I found her number and dialed. She was 10 minutes out. I told her to turn her delivery van around and head to the 3rd Ward. She did not ask questions. Vendors appreciate decisive action. Next was the efficient. Reverend Miller was a retired municipal judge who had known my late father. I called him. He was pulling into a gas station off the interstate. I gave him the new brewery address. Are you all right, Margaret? He asked. His voice was steady and calm. I am better than all right, I said. I am taking out the trash. He chuckled softly. He promised to be there in 20 minutes. I texted Simone back. I am moving the wedding to Milwaukee. Do not tell them. Simone replied 30 seconds later. I will manage the floor here. I will send you updates. Burn it down. Simone was now my inside asset. She would monitor the Caldwells while I built an alternate reality 25 m away. I looked down at my gown. It was heavy silk, tailored for a slow walk down a manicured garden path. It was not designed for scaling loading docks or running through industrial parks. I reached around to the side seam. I did not care about the optics anymore. I hitched the heavy skirt up, gathered the extra fabric in one fist, and marched toward my car. I got into the driver's seat and turned the ignition. The heater blasted against my frozen fingers. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the historic estate. I watched the padlocked iron gates shrink in my rearview mirror. I left the voided contract fluttering in the gravel behind me. The drive toward downtown Milwaukee gave me 25 minutes of silence. My mind raced through the remaining variables. The physical venue was secured, the food was in transit, the efficient was en route, but the core problem remained unsolved. It was 1:20 in the afternoon. 200 guests were currently navigating the interstate dressed in suits and gowns heading toward a locked gate in Waka. If they arrived at the estate, they would see the padlock. They would panic. They would start making phone calls. Eventually, someone would call Ethan, and Ethan would direct them all to the trap at Oakmont Country Club. I had to intercept my guests in transit. I had to reroute the human inventory before it reached the dead end. A group text would create endless replies and chaos. Individual phone calls would take hours I did not have. I needed a synchronized broadcast. I needed a way to draw a line in the sand, separating my people from Patricia and her country club. I merged onto the highway, pressing my foot down on the accelerator. The solution was sitting in the dashboard, mount right next to my steering wheel. I just had to hit send. I navigated the car onto the shoulder of the interstate on-ramp and shifted into park. The engine hummed against the freezing November air. My dashboard clock read 125. Time was the most critical resource in any supply chain crisis, and I was bleeding minutes. 200 people were currently driving across southern Wisconsin, dressed in formal wear, expecting a string quartet and a garden ceremony in Waka. If they reached the padlocked gates, confusion would spread. Confusion breeds phone calls, and phone calls would inevitably lead them straight to Patricia Caldwell at Oakmont Country Club. I reached for my phone mounted on the dashboard. 8 months ago, I refused to pay a wedding planner $4,000 for basic data management. Instead, I built a custom mobile application. It was a simple interface designed to track RSVPs, manage dietary restrictions, and distribute hotel block information. Patricia had mocked the software during a Sunday dinner, claiming it felt like registering for a corporate seminar. She preferred embossed heavy card stock and handwritten calligraphy. She did not realize that by mocking my digital system, she had opted out of understanding how it functioned. The application was not just an itinerary. It was a centralized communication network, and I held the master override. I opened the administrator panel. A list of 212 names populated the screen. The first step in mitigating a compromised supply route is isolating the bad data. I selected the master contact list and tapped the filter icon. I scrolled down to the Caldwell family section. My thumb moved with mechanical precision. I deselected Patricia. I deselected her sisters, the women who spent the last 2 years critiquing my career choices under the guise of offering polite advice. I deselected Ethan. I deselected Jard. I kept Simone checked, knowing she was my inside asset monitoring the country club floor. In less than 60 seconds, I purged the notification roster of anyone loyal to the country club regime. Only my family, my friends, and the extended Caldwell cousins remained. The cousins who lived out of state and found Patricia exhausting were deemed safe. I opened the mass alert function. A text box appeared waiting for input. When dealing with a disrupted logistics node, emotion is your enemy. Panic creates bottlenecks. Clarity ensures movement. I typed a brief factual message. Emergency venue change. The Wallow estate is inaccessible. The reception and ceremony have been relocated to the Industrial Brewery warehouse in the 3rd Ward District, downtown Milwaukee. Address attached. Food and drinks begin at 2:00. See you there. I did not mention the Caldwells. I did not mention a fake plumbing issue. I pressed send. A green progress bar flashed across my screen. The application transmitted the push notification and a mirrored text message to 180 devices simultaneously. I watched the delivery confirmations tick upward in real time. Within moments, cars across the interstate would be taking new exits. GPS routes would recalculate. The human inventory was successfully diverted. Patricia had spent weeks setting a trap, but she fundamentally misunderstood the battlefield. She fought with paper invitations and social pressure. I fought with real-time data. I shifted the car back into drive and merged onto the highway. The skyline of Milwaukee began to rise in the distance, gray and sharp against the winter clouds. I pressed the voice command button on my steering wheel and called Greg. He picked up on the first ring. The background noise on his end was a cacophony of slamming truck doors and shouting. "We are loaded," Greg said, his breath heavy. I listened to the sound of glass clinking and tires crunching on gravel. I pictured Greg hauling heavy wooden wine crates into the back of his delivery truck. He was moving with the same fierce, methodical energy that I felt behind the wheel. We were operating on the exact same frequency. He refused to let his culinary work be ruined by country club politics. "Are the warming ovens secure?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. "Strapped down and running on the generator," he replied. "My prep team is already in a second van heading east." We left the voided contract taped to TH. Padlock for whoever comes looking. "Good," I said. "I am 15 minutes away. What is our timeline for food service?" "The space is empty," Greg told me. "No cleanup required." The brewery manager left the loading dock doors open for us. We backed the truck straight in, dropped the tables, and popped the corks. "We will be pouring drinks by the time your first guests walk through the door." I thanked him and ended the call. The physical logistics were solved. The venue was secured. The inventory was moving and the guests were rerouted. But as I took the exit toward the third ward, the reality of the next phase began to settle into my chest. The mechanical problems were handled. The psychological warfare was just beginning. I pulled into the cobblestone alley behind the brewery. The neighborhood was a stark contrast to the manicured lawns of Wall. Towering brick buildings, iron fire escapes, and cold concrete sidewalks defined the landscape. It was raw and authentic. Greg's delivery truck was already backed into the loading dock. I stepped out of my car, holding the heavy silk of my wedding dress above the wet pavement, and walked into the warehouse. The space was breathtaking in its industrial simplicity. Vaulted ceilings, exposed steel beams, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Milwaukee River. Greg's staff was a blur of motion. They were unfolding long wooden tasting tables, snapping crisp white linens over them, and setting up a makeshift bar using stacked wooden pallets. It looked nothing like a traditional wedding. It looked like a brilliant, defiant celebration. I stood near the center of the room, watching the operation unfold. In less than 20 minutes, my family and friends would start walking through those doors. They would expect to see a groom. They would look around the brick warehouse, taking in the caterers and the wine, and they would ask where Ethan was. A traditional bride might dread that moment. She might hide in a bathroom, crying over the ruined timeline and the empty space beside her. She might feel the crushing weight of embarrassment. I did not feel dread. I felt a cold, clear focus. I was not going to hide. I was going to stand at the door, greet every single guest, and hand them a glass of wine. I would look them in the eye and let them wonder. The absence of the groom was not a failure on my part. It was a structural defect in the product I had almost purchased. I was merely issuing a recall before the warranty expired. For years, the Caldwell family treated me like an accessory to Ethan's life. I was expected to smile in photographs, attend charity galas, and swallow my opinions to maintain their pristine image. Patricia believed my role was to stand quietly in the background while she directed the play. Today, the script was mine. The first cars began to pull into the parking lot across the street. I saw my uncles stepping out of their vehicles, looking up at the brewery signage with confused but intrigued expressions. My college roommates emerged from a rideshare, laughing as they adjusted their heels on the cobblestone. The pivot had worked flawlessly. The audience was arriving exactly on schedule. Just as Greg walked over to hand me a glass of water, a distinct ringtone cut through the noise of the warehouse. It was coming from the pocket of my coat resting on a nearby chair. I walked over and pulled the device out. The screen displayed a photo of Ethan taken during a summer vacation 2 years ago. He was smiling, holding a drink, looking perfectly carefree. It was 1:45. The trap at Oakmont Country Club was set. The country club foyer was waiting. And Ethan Caldwell was finally calling to demand my exact arrival time. He expected me to be driving toward his mother, defeated and compliant. He expected a weeping, stressed bride, desperate for a solution he could pretend to offer. I stared at his smiling photo for a long second, taking a deep breath of the cold warehouse air. The logistics phase was over. The confrontation had arrived. I slid my thumb across the screen and answered the call. I pressed the green button on the screen and raised the phone to my ear. I did not say hello, I just listened. The background noise on his end was a blend of clinking crystal glassware and soft jazz piano. It was the unmistakable soundtrack of the Oakmont Country Club foyer. Ethan sighed. It was not a sigh of relief. It was the sound a man makes when he is waiting for a delayed flight or dealing with a stubborn subordinate. "Margit, where are you?" he asked. His tone was clipped and irritated. "My mother is pacing the lobby and my tuxedo shoes are pinching my heels. I told the tailor to leave an extra 1/4 in the instep, but they never listen to instructions. Just tell me how far out you are. We need to take pictures before the extended family gets here." I stood in the middle of a brick warehouse. Caterers carried trays of roasted vegetables and stacked wine crates past me. My future husband was not worried that I was missing. He was not concerned that our venue was padlocked. He was annoyed that his footwear was uncomfortable and his personal schedule was disrupted. "I am not on my way," I said. My voice was level. "I am standing outside a locked iron gate in Waka. Our venue is dark. There is a voided contract taped to the fence." Ethan let out a sharp breath. He did not sound surprised. He sounded like a middle manager preparing to deliver a rehearsed corporate excuse to a frustrated client. "Look," he said, "do not panic. My mother handled the situation. The estate had a major plumbing failure on Wednesday. Water poured everywhere. It was a disaster. Patricia called Oakmont and cashed in a huge favor to get us the grand ballroom on short notice. She saved the wedding. Just get in your car and drive here. We can still make this a perfect day if you just come inside and play nice." I listened to the lie. It was smooth. He had practiced it in the mirror, but liars always stumble over the logistics. Supply chains leave paper trails. Deception leaves a timeline. "Wednesday?" I asked. "Yes," Ethan replied. His voice gained a layer of false confidence. "Wednesday afternoon." It was a scramble, but Patricia pulled a miracle out of thin air. I looked at Simone standing near the makeshift bar across the warehouse. She had texted me 10 minutes ago about the custom printed napkins currently resting on the dining tables at Oakmont. "If the pipes burst on Wednesday," I said, "how did your mother manage to order, print, and deliver 200 custom monogrammed linen napkins by Saturday morning? The vendor we used for our save the dates requires a minimum 3-week turnaround for custom textiles. Did Patricia expedite the shipping, or did she cancel my wedding a month ago?" The jazz music played softly through the receiver. Ethan stopped talking. The silence stretched between us. It was the sound of a man realizing his narrative structure had just collapsed under basic scrutiny. "You are being paranoid," he said. His voice dropped an octave. The polite groom routine vanished. He sounded defensive and cornered. "She did us a favor. You know how expensive it is to fix a mistake like this at the last minute. You should be thanking her for stepping in. We got your deposit back. We saved $15,000 that we needed." I closed my eyes. The warehouse around me faded. The clinking wine glasses and the hum of the catering generator disappeared. One specific phrase echoed in my mind. "We saved $15,000 that we needed. I pay my own bills. I funded this wedding with my own savings account. I did not need $15,000. I needed a venue." Ethan was an accountant. He earned a high salary at a downtown firm. He drove a pristine imported sedan and wore custom-tailored suits. He never missed a golf trip with his partners. He was supposed to be the financially stable anchor of our relationship. "Why did we need the money, Ethan?" I asked. The question was a scalpel cutting through the remaining layers of his facade. I heard him shift his weight on the other end of the line. "Because starting a new life is expensive," he stammered. "We are buying a house soon. We need liquidity for the down payment." It did not make sense. You do not torch a wedding ceremony to secure liquidity unless the bank is already knocking on your door. And then the pieces of the puzzle began to snap together. I thought back over the last 4 months. Ethan had been glued to his phone during dinners. He excused himself to take hushed phone calls on Sunday mornings. Whenever I walked into his home office, he would quickly minimize browser windows displaying dense financial charts. He called it market research. He claimed he was diversifying his portfolio. "You did not diversify your portfolio," I said. My voice was low, but it carried across the connection. "You lost it." "What are you talking about?" "Out," he snapped. His voice cracked on the final word. "Crypto," I said. "You have been day trading on margin since April. You told me it was a hobby. You told me it was a secure alternative asset class, but the market crashed 3 weeks ago. You got a margin call." Ethan did not confirm the accusation, but his silence was a full confession. I pictured the ledger in my mind. He owed money, a lot of money. He could not ask his mother for a bailout because Patricia demanded perfection from her golden son. A financial failure would ruin his standing in the family hierarchy. He needed a quiet infusion of cash to cover his tracks. He needed half of a $15,000 venue deposit. He had gone to his mother and told her he wanted to move the wedding to Oakmont. He let her believe it was a victory for her social climbing agenda. In exchange, Patricia agreed to cancel the Wawa estate and intercept the refund check. She got the country club wedding she always craved. Ethan got the stolen deposit to pay off his digital gambling debts. "You sold our wedding," I said. "You let me plan, pay, and stress for an entire year. Why? Oh, let me drive to a locked gate in the freezing cold. You did all of this to cover your own financial incompetence." "Margaret, listen to me," Ethan pleaded. His tone shifted from defensive to desperate. "It was just a temporary cash flow problem. I was going to put the money back before the end of the quarter. The country club is nicer anyway. Everyone is happy here. My parents are thrilled. Just get here right now. We will drink champagne, smile for the photographer, and we will sort out the accounting on Monday morning. Please just play nice." He still did not understand the reality of his situation. He thought I was negotiating the terms of my surrender. He believed that the social pressure of 200 guests sitting in a ballroom would force me to walk down his mother's aisle. He thought my reputation mattered more than my self-respect. I looked around the craft brewery. My uncle was hugging my cousin near the entrance. The bartender was pouring a bright red wine into a crystal glass. The DJ was setting up his audio equipment. The room was warm, vibrant, and entirely honest. "I'm not coming to Oakmont," I said. Ethan let out a frustrated groan. "Margaret, stop being dramatic. Where are you going to go? You have nowhere else to be. The guests will be here in 20 minutes and you are holding up the entire schedule." "Actually, Ethan," I said, "the guests will not be there in 20 minutes. They are pulling into a parking lot in the 3rd Ward. They are walking into an industrial warehouse. They are currently drinking wine that I paid for and they are about to eat food that I selected." "What?" Ethan shouted. The country club jazz in his background seemed to mock his sudden panic. "What are you talking about?" "I rerouted the supply chain," I told him. "I updated the wedding application. I deleted your family from the notification roster. My friends, my family, and the people who actually care about the truth are here with me in Milwaukee. You and Patricia are standing in an empty room." "Margaret, you cannot do this," he stammered. "The bill for Oakmont is under my mother's name. There is a food and beverage minimum. She will be ruined. I will be ruined." "That sounds like a cash flow problem," I replied. "I suggest you diversify your portfolio." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear his voice, tiny and frantic, spilling out of the speaker. I pressed the red button. The call ended. The screen went black. I stood in the center of the warehouse. The heavy weight that had rested on my shoulders for 2 years suddenly lifted. I was not a bride scrambling to fix a disaster. I was a free woman who had just amputated a diseased limb. The relationship was officially dead. I turned around, smoothed the front of my silk gown, and walked toward the entrance to greet my guests. I learned the exact details of what transpired inside Oakmont Country Club from Simone. As a corporate auditor, she possesses a photographic memory for timelines and a distinct appreciation for watching bad investments collapse. She kept a meticulous mental ledger of the afternoon. At 2:30, the grand ballroom was pristine. Patricia wore a silver gown that looked more appropriate for a bride than a mother of the groom. She stood near the mahogany entrance doors holding a flute of sparkling water. She was practicing her savior narrative. Simone watched her rehearse the tragic story of the plumbing failure and her heroic last-minute rescue to the valet attendants. The tables featured towering centerpieces of white orchids and imported hydrangeas. The custom monogrammed napkins sat precisely folded at every place setting. A jazz trio tuned their instruments on a raised stage in the corner. The wait staff stood at attention holding silver trays of crab cakes and caviar blinis. It was a monument to old money aesthetics and manufactured perfection. The invitations clearly stated the ceremony would begin at 3:00. By 2:45, Patricia expected the foyer to be packed with shivering, grateful guests. She waited for them to rush in and thank her for salvaging the day, but the marble entryway remained bare. The valet staff stood idle under the sprawling portico outside. At 2:55, Patricia checked her watch. She adjusted a floral arrangement on the guest book table. She told Ethan there must be an accident on the interstate delaying the local traffic. Ethan stood near the bar, shifting his weight in his tight shoes, checking his phone screen every 10 seconds. The jazz trio began playing their pre-ceremony set. The upbeat music echoed awkwardly off the empty walls and uncreased linens. Simone sat in a high-backed leather chair in the far corner of the room. She held a glass of vintage champagne. She was the only person drinking, Her phone screen glowed in her lap. My digital reroute had successfully diverted my side of the guest list, but a few of Ethan's extended relatives were still confused by the conflicting information. His great-aunts from Chicago had pulled into a gas station to ask for directions. They texted Simone for clarification. Simone did not type a long explanation defending my character. She simply opened her map application, dropped a digital pin on the downtown craft brewery, and sent the location. She added a brief note stating the bride was in the third ward and the wine was already flowing. The aunts rerouted their vehicles immediately. They always found Patricia exhausting and they preferred an open bar to a rigid schedule. 3:00 arrived. The room remained deserted. The musicians finished a song and the resulting silence was heavy. 3:15 came and went. The elaborate ice sculptures near the seafood station began to drip onto the pristine tablecloths. The waitstaff exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure if they should continue circulating the warm appetizers to a room containing only 3 people. Patricia's confident posture began to fracture. She ordered Ethan to call his cousins. Ethan dialed 3 different numbers. All of them went straight to voicemail. He walked over to his mother and relayed the content of our earlier phone call. He told her I had used the wedding software to hijack the guest roster. Patricia laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound. She claimed I was bluffing. She insisted my family lacked the social capital and the financial resources to secure a new location on the Saturday afternoon. She believed I was sitting in a parking lot somewhere throwing a tantrum and that my guests would eventually surrender and drive to Oakmont. She told Ethan to tell the kitchen to hold the entrée. By 3:30 the illusion was entirely dead. The ballroom was a ghost town, and then the Oakmont event director walked through the double doors. His name was Arthur. He wore a tailored suit and carried a leather-bound portfolio. He did not look sympathetic. Country clubs do not operate on favors or social standing when the ledger is involved. They operate on binding agreements. Arthur approached Patricia. He cleared his throat and asked if the timeline required an adjustment. Patricia snapped at him. She demanded he keep the food warm until the guests arrived, blaming the delay on regional traffic patterns. Arthur opened his portfolio. He explained that the kitchen could hold the hot appetizers for another 20 minutes, but the billing structure remained fixed. This is where Patricia's grand plan imploded. When she booked the ballroom on Thursday, she bypassed the standard corporate protocols to secure the room on short notice. She used her personal membership number to bump another event and claim the premium space. She had signed a rush contract. That contract included a strict food and beverage minimum. Oakmont required the host to guarantee $25,000 in catering revenue. The policy was non-negotiable. If 200 people ate, the bill was $25,000. If 3 people stood in an empty room listening to a jazz band, the bill was still $25,000. Patricia stared at the paperwork. The color drained from her face. She argued with Arthur, her voice rising above the soft piano music. She claimed this was an emergency relocation and the club should waive the minimum out of professional courtesy. Arthur offered a polite, practiced smile. He pointed to her signature on the bottom line. He reminded her that the executive chef had already procured and prepared 200 portions of filet and Chilean sea bass. The club had staffed 20 servers on overtime pay. The bill was locked. It would be charged directly to her member account at the end of the business day. Ethan listened to the exchange from the bar. His secret cryptocurrency debt had driven him to steal my $15,000 deposit. He thought he had outsmarted the system. He thought he had balanced his personal ledger. Now he watched his mother absorb a $25,000 liability for a party nobody attended. His theft had not solved his financial crisis. It had multiplied the Caldwell family debt. The stolen venue deposit would barely cover half of the Oakmont invoice. The math was brutal and undeniable. My absence was not just a social embarrassment for his mother. It was a severe financial catastrophe for their entire household. Patricia dismissed the manager with a wave of her shaking hand. She turned to Ethan. The facade of the polite country club hostess vanished. She realized I was not hiding in a hotel room crying over a ruined day. I was throwing a fully funded reception 25 miles away. And I was making her look like a fool in front of her own country club staff. She grabbed her designer coat off a chair. She ordered Ethan to get the car. They were going to leave the empty ballroom, drive to downtown Milwaukee, and drag me back to the country club. They believed they could intimidate me into submission if they cornered me in person. Simone watched them storm out of the lobby. She finished her champagne, set the crystal flute on a passing waiter's silver tray, and followed them out the door at a leisurely pace. The psychological warfare had escalated. The Caldwells were driving toward the brewery, expecting to find a vulnerable bride they could bully into a car. They had no idea what was actually waiting for them. The atmosphere inside the Third Ward Brewery was electric. The scent of roasted barley and fresh winter rain drifted through the high rafter ceiling. 200 guests filled the cavernous room. There were no assigned seats. There was no forced protocol. The space was raw, defined by exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and towering copper fermentation tanks. It was a sharp contrast to the manicured, restrictive environment Patricia had intended for us. My digital reroute had functioned without a single flaw. Every person I wanted in this room had followed the coordinates. I watched my relatives step out of ride shares and personal vehicles, their formal suits and silk dresses clashing beautifully with the industrial neighborhood. They walked through the loading dock doors with expressions of polite confusion, expecting a disaster. Instead, they found a masterclass in crisis management. Greg and his catering team operated like a well-oiled machine. They had transformed wooden distribution pallets into a functioning bar within 20 minutes. Wait staff circulated through the growing crowd, pouring generous glasses of Cabernet directly from wooden shipping crates. The warming ovens hummed steadily against the far wall, sending the rich aroma of braised short ribs and roasted asparagus into the air. Greg had salvaged the menu perfectly. I stood near the entrance, serving as the front line for every arriving guest. The heavy white silk of my gown brushed against the concrete floor. I did not hide in a back room. I did not shed a single tear. For 30 minutes I greeted my friends, my coworkers, and my extended family. They hugged me, but their eyes constantly scanned the perimeter of the room. They were searching for a groom who was miles away. When they asked where Ethan was, I offered them a calm smile and pointed toward the bar. I told them to grab a drink and find a comfortable spot. I promised an explanation was coming. Ethan's cousins from Chicago stood near the center of the room. They were the relatives Patricia always seated near the kitchen doors during Thanksgiving dinners because she found their laughter too loud and their careers too ordinary. Today they were the first ones to grab drinks. They leaned against a steel girder, sipping wine and watching the operation unfold with deep amusement. They knew their Aunt Patricia. They knew her tactics. They could sense that a reckoning was about to happen. At 4:00, the room reached maximum capacity. The last stragglers had arrived from the highway. The distribution of the guests was complete. It was time to address the inventory. I signaled the disc jockey who had set up his audio equipment on a raised wooden platform. He nodded, reached toward his mixing board and cut the ambient background music. He walked over and handed me a wireless microphone. I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal grip and walked to the direct center of the warehouse. The conversations faded into a quiet, expectant hum. 200 faces turned toward me. The silence in the room was dense. "Thank you all for adjusting your travel plans. Today," I began. My voice echoed off the high ceilings. It was level and unwavering. I spoke with the same cadence I used during quarterly supply chain reviews. "You are probably wondering why you are standing in an industrial brewery instead of a historic garden. You are also wondering why I am standing here alone." A few guests exchanged nervous glances. Ethan's cousins stepped closer, their attention locked on me. 3 days ago, I continued, my mother-in-law canceled the Wallow estate. She did not inform me. She cited a fabricated plumbing emergency to the venue coordinators. She intercepted my $15,000 deposit and attempted to relocate this entire reception to her private country club. She did this to seize control of an event she did not finance, believing I would submit to her demands rather than risk public embarrassment. A collective gasp rippled through the older relatives. The concept of sabotaging a wedding was foreign to them. To hear it stated as a matter of fact without tears or hysterics was shocking. "Ethan knew," I said, letting the words land. "He knew on Wednesday. He allowed me to drive to a locked iron gate this afternoon. He allowed you to drive toward a voided contract. He did this because he recently suffered severe losses in undisclosed digital investments. He needed a portion of the refunded venue deposit to cover his own secret debts. He viewed this marriage not as a partnership but as a liquidity event. The silence in the warehouse deepened. The guests absorbed the financial betrayal. I looked directly at the crowd, making eye contact with the people who had traveled across the country to support me. "I do not negotiate with theft," I stated. "I do not partner with enablers, and I refuse to mar." A man who operates as a puppet for his mother. Therefore, the wedding is officially cancelled. I paused, letting the finality of the statement wash over the room. However, I added, raising my free hand toward the catering stations. "The food is fully funded, the bar is open, the venue is secured. I invite you to eat, drink, and enjoy the evening. Consider this a celebration of dodging a fatal bullet. Thank you for coming." I lowered the microphone for 3 seconds. Nobody moved. Then Greg made his move behind the makeshift bar. He was not just watching the speech. He had his smartphone raised, the camera lens focused directly on my face. He had hit record the moment I started speaking. Greg belonged to a highly exclusive private online network called the Wisconsin Wedding Vendors Blacklist. It was a digital coalition of caterers, florists, photographers, and venue managers who shared intelligence on toxic clients and fraudulent operators. Greg despised the old money arrogance of the country club elite. He hated clients who treated service industry workers like disposable assets. My speech was not just an announcement to my family. It was documented, unarguable evidence. Greg was already typing a caption, preparing to upload the video to the network. By tomorrow morning, Patricia Caldwell would be persona non grata in the local hospitality industry. No reputable vendor in the state would ever accept her contracts again. The silence in the crowd finally broke. Ethan's cousin from Chicago raised his wine glass high into the air. He let out a loud, echoing cheer. The rest of the room followed. Applause erupted from every corner of the warehouse. It was not polite golf tournament clapping. It was a roar of genuine support. My college roommates rushed forward, wrapping their arms around my shoulders. My uncle clapped me on the back, laughing in sheer disbelief. The tension that had gripped the room evaporated, replaced by the electric energy of a crisis brilliantly averted. The DJ faded in an upbeat driving track. The heavy bass vibrated through the concrete floor. Wait staff emerged from the prep area carrying large silver platters of hot appetizers. The unwedding reception had officially begun, and it was a triumph. I walked toward the beverage station, feeling the residual adrenaline recede from my veins. I set the microphone down on a table and accepted a glass of water from one of Greg's assistants. I took a deep breath. The logistics were settled. The truth was public. I had won, but the relief was temporary. The timeline of consequence was catching up. The upbeat music pulsing through the warehouse was suddenly interrupted by a loud metallic crash. The heavy metal doors at the front entrance swung open, hitting the brick wall with a deafening thud. The cold winter wind swept into the room, rustling the white linens on the nearest tasting tables. The conversations near the entryway died instantly. The silence spread backward through the crowd like a wave, eventually reaching the DJ, who quickly killed the music. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward the open doorway. Ethan Caldwell stood on the threshold. His tuxedo was impeccable, but his face was flushed red with panic and exertion. Patricia stood beside him, clutching her designer coat around her shoulders, her eyes wide as she took in the massive crowd she thought she had outsmarted. Jard stood a few steps behind them, looking profoundly uncomfortable. The Caldwells had arrived. The heavy metal doors shuddered against the brick wall. The cold Wisconsin wind rushed into the warehouse, carrying the distinct scent of wet asphalt and impending snow. The sudden noise severed the celebratory hum of the room. The disc jockey instinctively slid his master fader down, killing the bass line. The ensuing quiet was immediate and profound. 200 faces turned toward the loading dock entrance. Ethan Caldwell stood on the threshold. His tailored tuxedo looked rigid and absurd against the industrial concrete backdrop. His chest heaved with shallow, erratic breaths. Beside him stood Patricia. She wore her silver floor-length gown, clutching the lapels of a thick cashmere coat. Her jaw was set in a tight, unyielding line. Behind them hovered Jard, Ethan's older brother, staring at his polished shoes as if praying the floor would open up and swallow him whole. Patricia did not hesitate. For 30 years, she had navigated charity galas, hospital fundraisers, and country club boardrooms by dominating the physical space. She believed authority was established by moving first and speaking loudest. She released her coat, letting it fall carelessly into Jard's waiting hands, and marched directly toward the center of the room. The crowd of my family and friends instinctively parted for her. They were not deferring to her power. They were stepping back to observe a spectacle. I stood near the makeshift bar, the wireless microphone still resting in my right hand. I did not step forward to me. In supply chain logistics, you never abandon a fortified position to engage an erratic variable. You let the variable expend its energy, expose its trajectory, and then you dismantle it. Patricia stopped 10 ft away from me. She scanned the room, her eyes darting over the catering stations, the string lights, and the faces of her own extended relatives holding plastic cups of craft beer. She calculated her audience. She inhaled deeply, preparing to deploy her savior narrative. "Margit, this has gone far enough," Patricia announced. Her voice was highly practiced. It carried the specific piercing resonance of a woman accustomed to halting committee meetings. "I understand you are upset. Weddings are stressful events, but throwing a public tantrum and dragging our guests into a dirty warehouse is unacceptable." She turned her body slightly, opening her stance to address the surrounding crowd. She wanted to recruit them. She needed them to view her as the victim of a chaotic bride. "The Wao estate had a severe gas leak," Patricia declared, pressing her hand against her chest in a gesture of profound distress. "It was dangerous. The local fire marshal was threatening to evacuate the entire block. I spent my entire morning leveraging every personal contact I possessed to secure the Oakmont Grand Ballroom. I put my own reputation on the line to rescue this day. I tried to provide a beautiful, safe environment." And instead of showing a single ounce of gratitude, Margit decided to act like an unhinged child and sabotage the schedule. She looked back at me, her chin raised in defiance. Her performance was technically flawless. It featured high stakes, personal sacrifice, and a convenient scapegoat. In a different setting, behind closed doors, it might have succeeded. But Patricia forgot one crucial detail. She was no longer operating in an isolated environment where her word was law. I raised the microphone to my lips. I did not raise my voice. I did not let a single trace of emotion bleed into my tone. "That is a fascinating timeline, Patricia," I said. "The amplified sound reverberated off the steel rafters, but it presents a significant logistical conflict." I pulled my smartphone from my pocket. I tapped the screen, opening our text thread. I held the device up for the room to see. "Your message to me at 1:15 this afternoon explicitly cited a plumbing issue." I read aloud. "You stated there was a burst pipe. You did not mention a fire marshal. You did not mention natural gas. So for the benefit of everyone standing in this room, could you please clarify which utility failure are we blaming today?" The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Patricia's confident posture cracked. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She looked at Ethan, then back at my phone. The crowd absorbed the contradiction. A sudden, sharp intake of breath echoed from a group of my coworkers standing near the copper fermentation tanks. "You cannot build a functional supply chain on faulty data. You cannot sustain a lie when the recipient holds the original receipt." Ethan surged forward, stepping between his mother and me. His face was a dark mottled red. He pointed an accusatory finger at my chest. Throughout his entire life, Ethan was the golden child who never had to face consequences because Patricia always bought his way out of trouble. He expected that dynamic to protect him. "Now turn that microphone off," Ethan demanded. His voice was a harsh hiss, desperate to contain the damage. "Stop embarrassing my mother. She was trying to help you. You are taking a simple miscommunication and blowing it out of proportion because you always have to be right." He was attempting to gaslight me in front of 200 witnesses. He was banking on my lifelong habit of avoiding public confrontation to keep the peace. He assumed I would shrink back. I did not shrink. "I am not embarrassing your mother, Ethan," I replied through the sound system. "She is doing that herself, and you are not defending her honor. You are trying to deflect from the fact that you needed my $15,000 venue refund to cover your collapsed cryptocurrency portfolio." The crowd erupted. It was not a polite murmur. It was the raw, vocal reaction of ordinary people witnessing a country club scam fall apart in real time. Ethan's own cousin, a high school football coach from the Chicago suburbs, leaned over the wooden tasting table. "Sounds like you guys got caught," he called out. A ripple of sharp laughter and agreement swept through the back of the room. My uncle, a retired mechanic who had always found Patricia insufferable, crossed his arms over his chest. "Go back to Oakmont," he shouted. "We are doing fine without you." The heckling stripped Patricia of her armor. She looked around the industrial space, realizing her social currency was worthless here. Her designer gown and her elite memberships could not protect her from the blunt reality of her own text messages. She had checked in as a commanding matriarch and was now standing in the center of a brewery as a public punchline. Jard took a step backward toward the exit, his eyes glued to the concrete floor. He wanted no part of this sinking ship. He represented the silent complicity of the Caldwell men, always retreating when the matriarch faced genuine opposition. Ethan spun around, glaring at his own relatives, his fists clenched tight at his sides. He looked like a cornered animal, searching for a way to regain control of a narrative that was already reduced to ashes. Patricia opened her mouth to scream, to issue a threat, to demand respect from the people mocking her. She never got the chance. From the right side of the warehouse, the crowd of guests slowly parted. A clear path opened through the center of the room. Simone walked forward. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, her low heels clicking rhythmically against the polished concrete. Her expression was neutral, professional, and chillingly calm. She did not look at her husband, Jard. She did not look at her brother-in-law, Ethan. She walked directly toward me, holding her sleek silver corporate tablet in her right hand. The screen was glowing brightly in the dim warehouse light. Simone stopped beside me. She turned to face her mother-in-law. Patricia's eyes darted to the tablet, and for the first time all day, genuine terror flashed across the older woman's face. The social dismantling was finished. The financial execution was about to begin. Simone stood beside me on the polished concrete floor. She did not look like a woman caught in the middle of a bitter family feud. She looked like a professional preparing to present a devastating quarterly earnings report to a hostile board of directors. Her posture was impeccable, her expression unreadable. Simone managed internal compliance for Caldwell Industries. It was a mid-tier commercial real estate firm that Patricia ruled with an iron fist. For years, Patricia assumed that granting her daughter-in-law the lead auditor position was a clever method of keeping her subordinate. She failed to understand a fundamental business truth. The person who audits the ledger possesses the ultimate access to the truth. Simone did not deal in emotions or family loyalty. She dealt in data, and data does not lie. She tapped the screen of her sleek silver tablet. She did not speak into the microphone. She did not need to. She simply handed the device to me. I looked down at the high-resolution display. It was a digital bank statement. The document showed the primary operating account for the Caldwell family business. Highlighted in bright glaring yellow was a pending incoming transaction dated Thursday morning. The amount was exactly $15,000. The sender was listed as the historic estate in Waugh, my original wedding venue. My stomach tightened, not from sorrow or betrayal, but from the sheer staggering audacity of the crime. Event venues do not randomly issue deposit refunds to third-party corporate entities. I had paid my initial venue retainer using my own personal checking account. Standard merchant banking protocols mandate that refunds must be returned to the original payment method. To circumvent that financial safeguard requires distinct intent, calculated planning, and falsified documentation. I swiped my index finger across Simone's screen, navigating to the second piece of evidence. It was a PDF attachment. The header displayed a generic email address containing my first and last name followed by a random string of numbers. I had never seen or authorized that email address in my life. The document itself was a formal change of payment routing authorization form. It requested the venue to terminate my wedding contract and route the refund to an alternate bank account due to a sudden severe family emergency. The routing and account numbers listed on the form belonged to Caldwell Industries. At the bottom of the page, resting on the digital signature line, was my name. It was penned in a looping cursive font that vaguely resembled my handwriting. Patricia did not just make a demanding phone call to steal my venue. She committed identity theft. I looked up from the glowing tablet. Patricia was staring at the silver device in my hands. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch was gone. In her place stood a woman rapidly calculating her legal exposure. I raised the wireless microphone back to my lips. As I mentioned earlier, I told the quiet crowd, my voice echoing off the exposed brick walls, Ethan required $15,000 to hide his digital gambling debts. What I did not know until this exact moment was the specific mechanism his mother used to procure those funds. I held the tablet up, rotating the screen so the front rows of guests could clearly see the highlighted banking ledger. My sister-in-law is the lead compliance officer for the Caldwell family business, I explained, keeping my tone clinical and precise. 3 days ago, she flagged a high lie anomalous incoming wire transfer to the corporate operating account. The origin of the funds was my wedding venue in Wall. The amount was my exact deposit. Ethan took a staggering step backward, his polished shoes scraped loudly against the concrete. To authorize this transfer, I continued, locking my gaze on Patricia, my former mother-in-law. Created a fraudulent email account posing as me. She drafted a formal change of routing request. She forged my signature on a legal financial document. She submitted it across state banking lines to intercept my personal funds. The low murmurs in the warehouse ceased entirely. Heckling is reserved for social embarrassments and petty drama. Corporate embezzlement commands total suffocating silence. You crossed a distinct boundary today, Patricia, I said. The sound system amplified the cold finality of my words. You transitioned from a manipulative parent into a federal felon. Patricia's face lost every trace of color. Her skin turned a translucent, sickly shade of gray. The reality of the situation crashed down upon her shoulders. She was standing in a room filled with 200 witnesses. I held the unarguable digital proof of her forgery. The narrative she had spun about a gas leak was not just a pathetic lie to save face at a country club. It was a desperate, failing cover story to hide a felony theft. Ethan looked at his mother in sheer horror. He had wanted a quiet cash infusion. He had asked her to fix his liquidity problem. He had not anticipated that her solution would involve wire fraud. Ethan was a certified public accountant. He understood the exact penal codes his mother had violated. He knew that possessing a CPA license while being tied to identity theft would result in immediate disbarment and potential prison time. His attempt to cover a secret crypto debt had just tethered him to a federal crime. I lowered the tablet and handed it back to Simone. She accepted the device with a crisp, confirming nod. I turned my attention to Ethan. He was shaking. The confident, annoyed groom who had ordered me to play nice on the phone less than an hour ago was eradicated. He looked like a man watching his entire career and future dissolve into ash. I lifted my left hand. The diamond engagement ring felt heavy on my finger. It was a platinum band holding a 2-carat cushion cut stone. It was supposed to symbolize a lifetime of equal partnership and trust. Instead, it represented a down payment on a fraudulent existence. I reached across with my right hand and grasped the cold metal band. I slid the ring over my knuckle. I did not throw the jewelry at his chest. I did not hurl it across the room in a dramatic display of cinematic heartbreak. Supply chain managers do not waste energy on theatrical fits of rage. We operate with focused efficiency. Ethan was standing next to a high-top wooden cocktail table. Resting on the surface was a half-empty pint glass of dark craft beer abandoned by a guest during the initial commotion. I took 3 steps forward. The crowd held its collective breath, parting slightly to give me a clear path. I stopped directly in front of Ethan. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer a pathetic apology, perhaps to beg for mercy. I did not give him the opportunity to utter a single syllable. I held my left hand directly over the pint glass. I opened my fingers. The platinum ring fell. It hit the surface of the dark liquid with a soft, distinct plop. It sank instantly to the bottom of the heavy glass, coming to rest among the golden foam. "Keep it," I said. My voice was quiet, but the microphone carried the instruction to every corner of the room. "Put it toward your legal fees." Ethan stared down at the sunken diamond. He could not look me in the eye. Jard, who had remained silent and invisible throughout the entire ordeal, finally moved. He grabbed his mother's arm. He did not ask her if she was all right. He gripped her cashmere coat and practically dragged her toward the loading dock exit. Patricia stumbled over the hem of her silver gown, her head lowered, hiding her face from the dozens of smartphones that were now recording her retreat. Ethan turned and followed his family. He walked through the heavy metal doors, stepping out into the freezing Wisconsin evening. The doors swung shut behind them, sealing the warehouse with a heavy metallic click. The Caldwells were gone. I turned back to face my guests. The tension in the room vibrated through the steel support beams. I looked at the disc jockey. He was staring at me from his elevated platform, his hand hovering over his mixing board waiting for a signal. I gave him a sharp, decisive nod. He pushed the master fader up. A driving, energetic bass line pumped through the massive speakers. The tension snapped. The crowd let out a deafening roar of approval. My uncle grabbed a fresh glass of wine. Ethan's cousins rushed the bar, laughing in disbelief. The catering staff emerged from the prep R. Passing trays of hot appetizers back into the eager crowd. The unwedding party resumed with a triumphant, undeniable energy. I walked over to Simone. We did not need to exchange a single word. We picked up 2 glasses of Cabernet, clink-kegged the rims together, and turned to watch the celebration. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and freezing temperatures. I walked into my logistics office at 8:00, set my coffee on my desk, and opened my laptop. I began reviewing freight manifests for the week. The supply chain never sleeps, neither does the internet. While I was resting on Sunday, the digital footprint of my unwedding had expanded across the country. The fallout was digital, financial, and immediate. Greg did exactly what he promised. On Saturday night, he uploaded the unedited recording of my speech to the Wisconsin Wedding Vendors Blacklist. It was intended as an internal warning to other service professionals to avoid booking contracts with the Caldwell family. However, someone in that private group recognized the sheer entertainment value of the footage. They screen-recorded the video and posted it to TikTok on Sunday morning. By Monday, the video had crossed 4 million views. It was not hard to understand why the algorithm favored it. The internet feeds on drama, but it worships a calculated, factual takedown. The footage showed a bride in a heavy silk gown standing in an industrial warehouse, methodically dismantling her wealthy mother-in-law with banking ledgers. There was no screaming. There were no tears. There was only the cold delivery of unarguable proof. The final frame of the video was the definitive hook. It captured the exact moment I dropped a 2-carat diamond ring into a glass of dark craft beer and told my former groom to put it toward his legal fees. The consequences materialized for the Caldwell family before the local banks even opened their doors. Patricia Caldwell had spent her entire adult life curating an elite social image. She believed her wealth and her country club status insulated her from accountability. She woke up on Monday to learn that social currency is the most volatile asset on the market. When the video hit the local Milwaukee news networks, her inner circle severed ties with ruthless efficiency. High society circles do not tolerate public embarrassment, especially when that embarrassment involves federal wire fraud. The women who drank mimosas in Patricia's son's room the previous week were now sending her calls straight to voicemail. She was quietly uninvited from the hospital charity gala planning committee. Her reputation as a commanding matriarch was reduced to a digital punchline. The social exile was only the first phase of her ruin. The financial reality followed an hour later. At 9:00, the billing department at Oakmont Country Club processed their weekend event ledger. They charged $25,000 to Patricia's member account. Patricia called the club manager to dispute the charge. She argued that the event was a disaster and nobody consumed the food. The manager informed her that her personal family crisis did not void a signed, legally binding contract. The executive chef had procured and prepared 200 portions of premium catering. The service staff had worked their shifts on overtime pay. The club was deducting the funds directly from her linked checking account. Patricia was bleeding cash and her social armor was shattered. While Patricia fought a losing battle with the country club billing department, Ethan was discovering the true cost of his cryptocurrency gambling. Ethan worked as a senior accountant for a prestigious firm in downtown Milwaukee. In the financial sector, trust is the only currency that truly matters. A certified public accountant must maintain a spotless, ethical record to retain clients and employment. By 10:00 that morning, the managing partners at his firm had seen the viral video. The footage had been shared across professional networks and linked in local business forums. The video did not just depict a messy breakup. It explicitly detailed identity theft, forged signatures, and wire fraud committed to intercept $15,000. Worse, it revealed that Ethan had used those stolen funds to cover undisclosed digital trading debts. Ethan was called into human resources before his morning meetings concluded. A financial firm cannot retain an accountant who is publicly implicated in intercepting funds and falsifying payment routing documents against his own fiancée. The liability was too high. He was suspended immediately, pending a full internal investigation. He was ordered to hand over his security badge and clear his desk. His career was evaporating in real time, destroyed by the very deceit he thought would save him. Chaos creates opportunity. While Patricia and Ethan were suffocating under the weight of their own actions, Simone executed her exit strategy. Simone had endured 4 years of thinly veiled insults, condescension, and racism from her in-laws. She had stayed married to Jard because she was gathering financial data and waiting for the optimal moment to leave without being subjected to a protracted, ugly divorce battle. The viral destruction of the Caldwell family provided the perfect smoke screen. With Patricia fighting the country club and Ethan losing his job, nobody was watching Jard. The Caldwells were too busy fighting a raging inferno to notice a single spark. On Monday afternoon, Simone finalized her legal paperwork. She officially filed for divorce. She packed her belongings, left her keys on the kitchen counter of their suburban home and drove away. She used the catastrophic public fallout as an unarguable cover to extract herself from their toxicity forever. She did not ask for permission or engage in a final argument. She simply closed her ledger and walked out, leaving Jard to navigate his family's collapse alone. By 3:00 in the afternoon, my personal phone began to ring. It was Ethan. I did not answer. The calls rolled to voicemail. He called 4 times in the span of an hour. The digital transcriptions of his voice messages populated on my computer screen, allowing me to read his escalating panic without ever hearing his voice. His tone shifted with each attempt, tracking the stages of a man losing total control over his narrative. The first message was defensive and demanding. He ordered me to release a public statement calling the video a misunderstanding. He claimed I was ruining his life and his career over a temporary cash flow issue. The second message shifted to bargaining. He offered to return my $15,000 out of his own depleted savings if I would just answer the phone and agree to talk to his managing partners. He needed me to provide an alibi. By the fourth message, the arrogance was entirely gone. The transcription showed pauses and stuttering. He was crying. He begged me to help him fix the situation. He claimed he did not know his mother was going to commit wire fraud. He said he just wanted to pay off his margin calls and marry me so we could start a fresh life. He was lying. He knew exactly what he was doing when he let me drive to a padlocked iron gate in the freezing Wisconsin wind. He knew what he was doing when he complained about his tight tuxedo shoes while I stared at a voided contract. I sat at my desk and read the final voicemail transcription. I felt no pity. Pity is reserved for victims of unforeseen circumstance. Ethan was a victim of his own choices. He had gambled his money. He had gambled my wedding and he had lost the bet. Now he wanted me to cover his margin call to save his reputation. I deleted the voicemails. I opened a new email draft. The social humiliation Patricia was experiencing was a byproduct of the internet. The career suspension Ethan faced was a byproduct of his employer. I had not initiated either of those events. They were the natural consequences of their own exposure. But the stolen venue deposit was a direct theft of my personal assets. It was time to close the account. I typed Patricia's email address into the recipient line. I added Ethan to the field. Then I added the email address of my corporate lawyer to the copy line. I attached the digital bank statement showing the incoming wire transfer. I attached the PDF form containing my forged signature. The evidence was pristine, undeniable, and ready for deployment. The digital guillotine had fallen on their social lives, but the final clinical checkmate was mine to deliver. I did not schedule a meeting. Corporate showdowns and glass conference rooms belong in television scripts, not in the functional reality of conflict resolution. When you possess undeniable leverage, you do not need to share physical space with your adversaries. You only need to deliver the terms of their surrender. I sat at my desk and opened my email client. In the recipient field, I typed Patricia's address followed by Ethan's. In the copy field, I added the contact information for my corporate attorney, a man named Robert Hayes who specializes in civil litigation and fraud. I clicked the attachment icon. I uploaded 3 distinct files to the draft. The first was the bank ledger. Simone had extracted, clearly displaying the $15,000 incoming wire transfer to the Caldwell business operating account. The second was the fraudulent routing authorization PDF featuring my forged signature. The third was the Oakmont Country Club banquet invoice I had acquired through Greg's vendor network, proving the financial motive for the initial theft. The text of my email was brief. It contained no exclamation points. It offered no moral judgments or expressions of heartbreak. I simply outlined the facts. I stated that on the morning of Thursday, November 12th, Patricia Caldwell engaged in identity theft and federal wire fraud to intercept funds belonging to my personal estate. I noted that Ethan Caldwell acted as a knowing accessory to this financial crime to cover personal investment deficits. I set the parameters. I wrote that they had a binary choice. They could return the exact sum of $15,000 to my checking account by 5:00 that afternoon. If the funds did not clear by the designated deadline, my attorney would forward the attached dossier to the local district attorney and initiate a civil suit for damages. I did not sign off with a polite closing. I simply typed my name. I moved my cursor over the send button and clicked. The window vanished from my screen. The operation was officially out of my hands. I spent the rest of the afternoon routing freight. I reviewed shipping manifests for a logistics fleet operating out of Chicago. The contrast between my calm, structured environment and the panic undoubtedly unfolding across the city was stark. I pictured Patricia sitting in her immaculate living room, staring at her phone screen, realizing her country club influence could not erase a time-stamped digital audit. I imagined Ethan sitting in his apartment, suspended from his accounting firm, watching his final avenue of escape evaporate. The clock on my desktop monitor shifted to 4:00, then 4:30. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds of my office, casting long geometric shadows across my desk. I did not pace. I did not repeatedly refresh my banking application. A properly executed contract requires patience. You set the terms and you wait for the counterpart to meet them. At 4:45, my smartphone vibrated against the wooden surface of my desk. I picked up the device. The screen illuminated with a push notification from my financial institution. A new transaction had posted to my primary checking account. The text was rendered in bright green font. The amount was $15,000. The sender origin was listed as the Caldwell family business account. The memo line was entirely blank. They did not attempt to label it a gift or a misunderstanding. It was a silent, forced capitulation. The stolen funds had returned to their rightful origin. The ledger was balanced. 5 minutes later, the phone vibrated a second time. This notification was a direct text message. The sender was Ethan. He could not accept the silence. People who spend their lives avoiding accountability are terrified of finality. They always need to fire one last shot. Hoping to reframe their cowardice as virtue, I opened the message. It was a single sentence. I was just trying to keep the peace. I read the words twice. It is the universal anthem of the enabler.